I often like to say that while nutritional science can be vastly complex, eating healthy should be simple. Most of us know the types of foods we should avoid and the types of foods that nourish our bodies and our minds. So, why do so many of us struggle with maintaining a healthy weight? Why are so many of us sick? And why are metabolic illnesses, the so-called lifestyle diseases, on the rise at such alarming rates in spite of the fantastic advances in technology and medicine? Today, I want to invite you into an in-depth discussion on the topic of functional medicine and more specifically, functional nutrition. I want you to step back and reimagine medicine and nutrition and their role in healthy aging to help you navigate the messy worlds of medicine, science, popular media, and your own bio-individuality. Stick around, we have a great conversation coming up. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm the founder of The Silver Edge, and our mission is to help you build and maintain a lean, healthy body that you love for the rest of your life so that you can show up in life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. We have a great show for you today. Andrea Nakayama is here, and she's going to help us understand what functional nutrition is and how we can apply the principles of functional nutrition to our everyday lives. But before we get to that, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by The Silver Edge. The Silver Edge is my online nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle coaching business catering to those of you over 50 who aren't ready to give up and buy into the common narrative of it's all downhill from here. At The Silver Edge, we take a health-first approach to working with our clients to help them build lean, strong, and vital bodies that last a lifetime. Look, there's no shortage of lose weight quick products and coaches in the world, but here's the deal. You can either lose weight quickly or permanently. So if you're tired of losing and gaining the same weight over and over again, if you're tired of constantly dieting, if you have a poor relationship with food, exercise, and your body, then I invite you to book a call and see if our services are a good fit for you. The easiest way to do this is head over to silveredgefitness.com and click on the coaching tab, or just shoot us an email at coach@silveredgefitness.com. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's show. My guest today is Andrea Nakayama. Andrea is the founder of the Functional Nutrition Alliance. She's a functional medicine nutritionist and educator, and she's also the host of the 15-Minute Matrix podcast. Andrea is leading thousands of students and practitioners around the globe in a revolution to offer better solutions to the growing chronic illness epidemic by highlighting the importance of systems biology, root cause methodology, and therapeutic partnerships. And today, she's going to help us unpack all of that and reclaim ownership of our health. I started our interview by asking Andrea how she got interested in the subject of functional nutrition.
I think like many of us in healthcare, but also many of us who are over 50, this isn't the first jam for me. This was not my first career. I worked in a very different field. I worked in book publishing for over 15 years. During that time, my husband, Isamu, was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor when I was just 7 weeks pregnant. And this is back in April of 2000. And so during that time, I really was made aware through our experience of being in the healthcare system of the benefits and the deficiencies of our healthcare system. And I don't ever like to say it's just one or the other, because I think we have to recognize what our medical system does do and where it's leaving some gaps in care. So we went through 2.5 years of working with my husband's brain tumor and his diagnosis and all the medical treatments. He, at the time of diagnosis, was given about 6 months to live. So 2.5 years was a gift, especially given that I was 7 weeks pregnant. So he had about a year and a half with our son to make a good imprint. And we did so many things during that time. I think of it as my boot camp in nutrition. But of course, I didn't know then what I know
Mm.
now. And I say that without regret because that doesn't help me to live in regret. But I feel like all I do with the thousands of students and thousands of clients that I've done over the last 20 years is really in his name and in an effort to fill the many gaps in healthcare that so many of us experience when we enter that system.
Well, thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable with us here.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people can relate to several parts of your story there. One is, hey, I wasn't always doing this. A lot of us in our 50s, 60s, even 70s are we're retiring or we're making these career moves. Many of us obviously have lost loved ones
Yeah.
and have been through that medical system like you're talking about. And many of us have noticed that gap that you referenced several times in healthcare, and let's kind of pick that apart a little bit. You said, "Hey, having been through that healthcare system in such an intensive way, I saw both the good, the bad, and the ugly." Right? Do you mind talking to us a little bit about what you mean about the gaps in healthcare? Where were some of these downfalls?
Yeah, one of my favorite conversations. So thank you for the
Sure.
question. I think there's a good number of gaps. And one of those is that people are seen or treated like their diagnosis. So here I was, pregnant young woman in my 30s with a husband with a deadly cancer. And we were treated like he was a dead man, and people felt sorry for me. Wherever we went, there was whispering in the hallway about who we were. And so I never felt like he was treated like the man he was who had a glioblastoma multiforme. Instead, he was treated like a glioblastoma multiforme. So people would talk to me in the room, assuming he couldn't understand, when I was always trying to direct the attention back to him as this very stoic man who was very smart, very intelligent, very compassionate, and ready to take this on. So that was one gap I experienced. The other gaps had to do with what we could do in the time between our medical appointments. So I always like to say to people, how often do you see your doctor? Maybe it's once a year, maybe it's twice a year, maybe it's more often if you're going through something acute, but there are these long stretches of time between your doctor's visits where there's a gap in care. And I do believe that gap can be filled by other kinds of providers as well as by ourselves as patients who can actually understand how we support ourselves from our vantage point. I think unfortunately, patients are playing practitioner a lot these days because there's so much information
Yeah.
available, and there's ways we can also be better patients. So there's a number of gaps that exist. There's a gap in knowledge, there's a gap about what's appropriate, there's a gap in time, there's a gap in care. And so for me, it's about understanding how we fill those gaps, both as patients, which we all are at some point or another, but also in my work training other practitioners.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. And again, that resonates with me as I'm hearing you talk about these kind of gaps and people being seen as their diagnosis. Oh, he's a diabetic. Oh, she's a hypertensive, and
Correct.
or what cancer, obviously a big one there. And I hear you talking about that space in between doctor visits because you're right. If you're healthy, you're very blessed, and you're seeing your physician maybe once a year for your blood work and physical. But if you have something more acute or if you've got some sort of chronic illness, you're probably seeing the doctor, unfortunately, a bit more often than that. But what happens in between has to be critical, right? And in some cases, I could, in the case of chronic illness, we might make the case that what happens in between your doctor's visits is even more important than your doctor visit. But we'll get there in a minute. It sounds like maybe you were talking about we could be better patients. I'd like to pull that apart a little bit. Are you talking more about being our own healthcare advocates, or what? Explain what you mean when you say we can take that responsibility to become better patients.
Yeah, I think this is some place where my work is moving now. So I just want to be clear that I started in practice. I worked with thousands of clients, led online programs, then moved my work to train practitioners, which I still do. So I've trained about 8,000 practitioners in over 68 countries around the globe in my methodologies of care of functional nutrition. And as I'm turning my attention back to writing books and looking more at the patient, it's less from the position of a clinician and more from a position of education. And the reason I share that, Kevin, is because I think that the initial work I was doing or I should say, the secondary work I was doing with practitioners and still do was based on the three tenets of functional medicine. And one of those tenets, and we can explore those, is the therapeutic partnership. And what I was training practitioners to do, what I am training practitioners to do, is how to be a partner, to recognize that there are two experts in the room and the other expert is the patient. And the patient is an expert and has an expertise in something that you will never be an expert in as a provider unless you listen. And it's not your expertise to have, it's yours to pay attention to. And something I've come to realize is that we also need to train the patients to bring their expertise forward. And so being a patient advocate doesn't mean you're coming asking for that supplement or that lab test or give me this or why won't you? It instead means that we're showing up with our expertise that nobody in the room can have but us. And that's a deep understanding of our signs and symptoms, when they started. I call it timelining, understanding the confluence of things so that we can express the reality of what's happening for us, understand where those two partners come together in a relationship, in a dance, be our part of the dance partnership, not try to lead when it's not our lead, and not be passive and just take whatever it is, but show our expertise. In addition to that, I do believe, as a functional medicine nutritionist, that there's a lot of ways we can influence our health outcomes, whether we have a diagnosis or not, and recognizing those different areas of influence and who we are in relationship to those areas of influence is something I feel really passionate about.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And for those of you on the podcast, those of you watching YouTube, you're seeing me smile ear to ear. I can't wait to unpack all of this. But I want to back up a little bit because I love the way you talk about two experts. Because clearly, Kevin, I'm the world's leading authority on Kevin, right? I know
Correct.
myself better than a physician who sees me maybe periodically, right? And it's would behoove me to be my best patient self, then to, like you said, timelining, be aware, being able to report, as opposed to me Googling some things and saying, hey, now I know what's up. All right. So, but let's back all the way up because you said a lot there, and I definitely want to dig into functional medicine, functional nutrition. But before we go there, why nutrition? You started this story by saying, hey, I had this horrible incident as a young woman and it changed my career. I think you said I was publishing books at the time. And now you've gone, you kind of mapped this out. You were a practitioner and then you were kind of a certifying body for nutrition folks. And now you're going more into education. But why nutrition?
Yeah. So I think it comes back to, for me, what seemed like the obvious area of influence. So I was a passionate foodie. And really, before Isama's diagnosis, we were having dinner parties in San Francisco, shopping at the farmer's market. And when he got diagnosed, that's out of any realm of influence I mean, we had never really even been to the doctor for anything other than like a sinus infection, right? So it wasn't a realm that I was even thinking about medically, but I started to read about the influences we could have on his outcomes through other methodologies. And that was about the food we ate, the exercise, the breathing. And so I just started to see, what can I do? I'm feeling like I can't affect change. This is really disabling and disarming for me, as my soulmate is experiencing a death sentence. What can I actually do? And this led me into what I could do every day in those gaps. And so I started to read, here's the connection between sugar and cancer growth. I would bring that to him. It was his decision. I could cook the food, but he had to make the decisions about what he wanted to engage in so that his agency wasn't being taken away during this entire process, which was really important to me. So, understanding the difference between what foods we ate, what could be supportive while he was going through treatment, also for cancer growth. He actually looked healthier than he ever had. And he was a healthy young man in, early 30s. But during the time that he was going through chemo, he looks like vibrant because we had made such significant changes. And he was a big fat yes to everything that he could find evidence or information for because he was about to be a father. This is something he always wanted. His motivation was clear and he wasn't stuck in any of the emotional traps that we can get caught in when we're making change without purpose. The purpose was bigger than any apprehension he had. And so he was going to do it all. And I got to make it pleasurable and enjoyable because I knew he loved his food. And so that became the initial step for me. And as I've moved further and further into the work, recognizing and realizing what a difference nutrition, and by nutrition, I don't just mean food, because nutrition is about growth, metabolism, and repair. So that includes sleep and movement and breath and resilience and stress. So for me, nutrition became part of how we fill those gaps.
Absolutely love all of that. Sounded like that was the one thing that you said you had control over, and you saw that you could impact health incomes and you could outcomes.
Yes.
You could do that daily, right?
Yes.
So that led you down that path, and here you are years later and it's your life's work. Okay. So thank you for sharing that. Let's get into the fun stuff. What the
Yeah.
heck is functional medicine? You've mentioned it several times. What's that mean and why should we care?
Yeah, I think I love this question because I think either we think functional medicine is like Reiki or voodoo medicine. I'm not saying that Reiki is voodoo medicine or like people in people's mind, it's not solid medicine. And I think we've gone in a direction where there's a lot that is happening under the name of functional medicine that I wouldn't honestly call functional. So the primary tenets of a functional practice are that therapeutic partnership, looking for the root causes, which means we're asking, why is this happening? Not just what do I do about it? And taking a systems based approach. And I take that in two directions. One direction with the systems based approach is that we're embracing systems biology. We recognize that the brain is connected to the gut, something we all now know. Our hormones are connected to the liver, which is connected to the gut. We understand the basis of physiological connection. And the second way I think about systems is having a systematic approach, having the tools to let us think into any case, no matter what it is, but not leaning on a protocoled approach. So it's like more of a mental model than it is X for Y. So I have Hashimoto's. People might ask, what's the protocol for Hashimoto's? That's not functional because my Hashimoto's is different than somebody else's Hashimoto's. So embracing bio-individuality, we need more of a system than we need a protocol. And that's tough thinking for a lot of us who are very protocol focused these days. So again, three primary tenets of a functional practice should be, and this is the basis of functional medicine, which came about in the 90s and was based on systems biology. So therapeutic partnership, looking for the root causes, which means asking why, not what, and a systems based approach. And then we're building from there. And the difference between functional medicine and functional nutrition are the tools in our toolbox.
Gotcha. Okay. So we've got functional medicine, functional nutrition. So functional medicine, we've got this therapeutic partnership. We talked about that, right? I'm the expert, you're the expert, and we're
Yep.
in this together, right? We got this root cause, which I think is really a separator there, right? Because I think most of us, especially when we start talking about some of these chronic illnesses, your diabetes, your high blood pressure, your poor
Yes.
cholesterol markers, things of that nature, obesity, all of which are on the rise. And our modern medicine or conventional medicine, which is great for acute cases. And like you
Yep,
said, there's fabulous, fabulous things with Western medicine, but it doesn't seem to work very well in those cases. And I think that that's probably because that number two there primarily, right? They're very good at, I come in, oh, you're pre-diabetic, here, take this medicine. Okay, well,
exactly.
I've made you feel better. And as long as you keep taking that medicine, that symptom is better, I suppose, but I have not cured you. I've not gone to the root in any way. And I feel like a lot of our medicine, whether that's just over the counter medicine or our conventional Western medicine, goes that route. And you're saying, hey, in this functional medicine model, we are backing up. We're, I think, taking more time, and we're troubleshooting and diagnosing back to that root problem. And then finally, that systems based approach where I suppose it's part of medical training that we learn protocols, right? When this, then
That
this.
is,
That's a very
yes.
scientific flow chart, right? And that seems
It's
to
not
make
very
sense.
scientific. Like
Maybe maybe not so
it
much, right?
bypasses the scientific method, but somehow it is our system of care.
It does seem to be ingrained in our system of care, right? And you had mentioned we're all bio-individuals. And so even if we are showing the same symptoms, we may be experiencing completely different things here. All right. So now we have this system of functional medicine. How do we make the step from there to functional nutrition? How are
Yeah.
we
So to
applying
me,
this, I suppose, to food?
yeah, and that's something that I've really taken what is happening in functional medicine and asked that question and created the systems that allow us to think through a nutrition lens, which again have to do with the tools in our toolbox. So in functional medicine, those are medical practitioners who are still diagnosing, prescribing. They're just bringing a broader lens to that care. They may pay heed to the impacts of diet and lifestyle modification, but I will say dietary change is not a handout. So we in functional nutrition are basically double clicking on the factors that affect our body in those in between spaces. So that's sleep and relaxation, exercise and movement, nutrition and hydration, stress and resilience, our spiritual connections, relationships and networks. So we're understanding what I like to think of as the simplicity on the other side of complexity. So, what I know and what I teach is how the body should function. That deep understanding, that systems biology informs my decisions for a person, but not in a targeted way. Let me give you another analogy that might help with this. So I always say there is no one root cause, it's root causes. If we have any chronic sign, symptom, or diagnosis, it is a branch on the tree. So anything we can list or label, like you have diabetes, cancer, hypertension, also migraines, restless leg, PCOS, anything we can name is a branch on the tree. In our medical care, we're still addressing the branch. In a functional practice, we're coming down and saying, what are the roots? And in functional nutrition, we're saying, what is the soil that nourishes those roots? So I will tell you that in any chronic condition, the roots are always related to the genes or the genetic predisposition, digestion, and inflammation. It's not my job as a functional medicine nutritionist to target the problem or the diagnosis. It's my job to shift the terrain that's allowing those signs or symptoms or diagnoses to express. And this goes back to the patient conversation because a lot of patients are still playing target practice. They're looking for the root. They want the test to reveal the root. If we have that thing happening, it's happening in an environment. And we have the opportunity to shift that environment and not just play target practice, which is the branch.
I love that analogy. The symptoms are the branch, and your functional medicine then is going to be concerned with the roots, where our maybe more conventional medicine is going to be more concerned with the branch. And what you're talking about in this functional nutrition is what about the soil or the environment and the air and all of the things that are affecting this? That's a very holistic view. And we've come a long way from what probably a lot of people are expecting when we say functional nutrition. They're probably saying, hey, you should eat an apple a day, or
Right.
intermittent fasting is the way to go, or,
Right.
hey, let's cut down these processed foods. But when you talk about nutrition, you've done this several times. You said, when I talk about nutrition, I'm talking about your sleep and your spirituality and your rest and recovery. I'm talking about your exercise and all of, how are you handling stress? Because all of this is a part of your environment. And I think that is a very, very holistic view of nutrition. Now, we've talked about these chronic conditions, and you mentioned, a lot of these autoimmune things, and all of this is on the rise in spite of the growth in both traditional and I suppose functional medicine. Why do you think that is?
Oh my gosh, so many reasons. Again, like I think through a multifactorial lens, I think through a matrix, right? So we have moved farther away from ways of living, not just in what we consume, but in how we live, where we live, the air that we breathe, like you said, our exposure to sunlight. Everything's being shifted at once. And our bodies are trying to keep up in adaptation. We could talk about the epigenetic factors that are impacting our genes or those genetic predispositions. We could think about the stress factors. We could think about the microbial factors, right? This is the realm of omics where we recognize that everything is connected. And I like to say my mantra is everything is connected. We are all unique and all things matter. So we can look at two people exposed to the same toxin. That could be mold, that could be a food poisoning bacteria, that could be a virus as we've lived through, and have a different response. So it's a number of factors that we're exposed to and that we've shifted internally that are resulting in signs, symptoms, diagnoses, more often chronic than they used to be, that we're just not able to see into and resolve. But it's just not one reason, it's all the reasons and how your body's resilience is able to meet all those myriad factors.
Yeah, that's very well put. We're in an environment now that's much, much different than we've ever been in our life. And I suppose it's just technological advancement has just raced along so fast. Our biology can't possibly adapt. And we're surrounded by all of these new, I suppose, toxins, right? These things in our environment that usually born out of convenience and technology again. Our food has changed drastically just in the last 100 years, just in a ridiculous way. And most of us are sedentary, right? The technology again has made it so that I'm not out toting water and splitting wood and building shelter and hunting for my food. I sit behind a desk most of the day. So you said it's very multifactorial, and it's taken this big, big toll on our health. And I suspect from a layman's point of view, from the outside looking in, our medical system's just scrambling to try and keep up, right? I mean, we're trying to treat these things, but we're doing a pretty poor job of it from a medical perspective, it seems to me again. And so when I hear people like you talking about looking at this whole ecosystem, how would somebody listening to this who's not very sophisticated in maybe a lot of this, how do they get their arms around this complexity and make meaning of it for themselves and their health?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think, again, our medical system is fantastic at the technical and technological
Hmm.
advances that are allowing us to do surgery without cutting people open, remove tumor cells, address things medically that may need to be addressed medically. I think we're also using those techniques where they may not necessarily be the right intervention because that's what we know and how we think. So I really like to break it down for people to think about where do we need to focus? What do we need to focus on? So I've given you a lot of threes, three roots, the genes, digestion, and inflammation. We talked about the three tenets of a functional practice. I also like to think about the three tiers to nutrition mastery. Tier number one are the non negotiables. Tier number two is deficiency to sufficiency. And tier number three is dismantling the dysfunction. We tend to jump to tier three like I was saying, what's the branch, address the branch, or like our medical system does. And that feels sexier because you think you're going to get the thing resolved. But this is what leaves people in a trap of not finding an answer and trying things that aren't necessarily appropriate for them. So I want to invite people to come back to that tier one, your non-negotiables. Now, I'm going to say, because I love my threes, that the non-negotiable trifecta is sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. If that's where you need to focus or get help to support yourself, then that's where you're going asking questions. If you're not sleeping, you're not pooping, and your blood sugar isn't balanced, you're having experiences that are not only toxic, but you are also creating an internal system of stress that's contributing to all the stress that's going on in your life. I can't control the stress in your life. I can't control anything in your life, but I can help you influence what is happening so that you have a better playing ground to be able to take care of yourself. So non-negotiables, non-negotiable trifecta from a physiological perspective, sleep, poop, blood sugar balance. I'm not saying those things are easy. They're a priority. If you can make them a priority, make them a priority. If you need help, get help in one of those things. And then there's a lot of other non-negotiables that we can define for ourselves. Kevin, I'm sure for you, it's a non-negotiable, even though you're behind your computer, to move every day and to make that a priority. Maybe it's a non-negotiable to play music every day. It's a non-negotiable for me to read and have my mind engaged and listen to podcasts and know that I'm taking information from different places and synthesizing it in a way that helps me to teach and educate others about these realities. We all have for me, non-negotiable is sleep. I have to go to sleep at a certain time. And I love food. I want to love my food and enjoy my food. So we each have non-negotiables that we could be tending to that we're not even thinking about in relation to our health outcomes. But I want to promise you they are related. Whatever it is, time with your partner, love, sex, hydration, it's connected to your health outcomes. So what we can all do is focus on our non-negotiables, and we're actually practicing functionally.
I love all of that. So, all right. Well, hey, we talk a lot about sleep on this podcast. We've had a couple sleep experts on. I'm a firm believer that sleep is just the foundation of over 50 health, or really any health, but we're going to let sleep go. But what we haven't talked a lot about on this show is poop. In fact, I'm not sure we've ever talked a whole lot about poop. We've talked about gut health, and I suspect that's what you're getting at, right? But somebody listening to that just said, okay, I got 3 negotiable sleep. Okay, I should be getting 8 hours of sleep, and I'm not. I probably should tighten that up, right? You definitely should, by the way. And then you said poop, and then you said blood sugar balance or regulation in there. So let's just hit on those two. Somebody heard that and thought, oh, well, I don't know if is my poop good? Is my poop not good? Is my blood sugar good? Is it not good? What are some signs that people can look for when you say poop? What's healthy stool? What are we
Yeah.
looking for in regular bowel movements?
Yeah, and I'm being called upon to write about this a lot right now. So I feel like it's all about the poop right now. So another 3 for you, form, function, frequency. So we want to think about those 3, form, function, frequency. So we should at least be eliminating once a day. So that's a good baseline. And if we're not eliminating once a day, that's then a place to raise your hand or see where you can make some difference by what you put in, what you consume, how your digestive function is working. So our poop is our best diagnostic tool. I know a lot of people, again, because I see this all the time, are looking for the results of how they're doing outside of their body on a scale, on a test. I'm just going to tell you to look outside your body in the toilet because there's a lot of information
There
right
is.
there. So the
Yeah.
way we can alter what's happening with our poop positively is with fat, fiber, and protein. And those are ways we can just think, does every meal I include or I eat have fat, fiber, and protein? Does my body tolerate fiber? Is when I do consume fiber, is that changing the form or the frequency of my elimination. And what I'm inviting us into with this is the opportunity to come more into our self awareness and to be in a chance of tracking. Because that tracking and that knowledge, if I say, poop is a non-negotiable. And you're like, what am I supposed to do with my poop? Well, we don't even know where to start. And we're going to start labeling it good or bad when there's certainly a lot that we could be looking at in relation to our own elimination and start to play with that puts us in a better seat of agency and a better patient situation. So when we show up at the doctor saying, I'm only pooping once a day, but I noticed when I increase my water intake, that I don't have an issue going once a day, or when I do go once a day, it's better formed, it's a full sausage shape, it's the right color. All of those things become an opportunity for us to be in the scientific method, which is to play with the theories we're proposing or hypotheses or what we're stating and see what can make an actual difference. So that's what I'm going to say with poop. It's form, function, and frequency. So form should be well formed like a sausage, full. It should come out easily without too much strain and without any urgency. It should be at least once a day. 3 times is better. More than 3 times, we want to start looking at, is there something that we're rejecting or moving through us too quickly because our body doesn't feel good when we eat that? It's really tuning in as opposed to looking for the perfect poop. I had one of my case study group participants that I'm working with for my book was getting stuck. Now I feel like I'm trying to be type A with my poop. Like, is it the perfect poop? And it's more about this relationship of watching, tuning in, seeing what the results are and where we might be able to make a shift. And I'll tell you, fiber and hydration are 2 of the biggest places. And then there might be things going on in your digestion or in relation to stressors, whether those are dietary stressors or life stressors that are also impacting where you might need more help deciphering. But there's a lot we can do just by paying attention, fiber, hydration, and looking at what we can impact.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned there that just being self-aware, and I'm a huge fan of self-experimentation, right? So we know statistically that Americans, unfortunately, only 5% of you are getting your daily recommended fiber. So let's go, folks. We got some work to do there. But what would happen if let's say I track my fiber and, oh, I'm only getting 15 grams of fiber a day. Isn't that interesting? What would happen if as a man, I got 40, and then just do that for a month and see what happens and track. And like you said, that is a great diagnostic tool right there outside your body every day, maybe multiple times a day. All right. What about blood sugar? So you also mentioned that blood sugar balance is another one of these kind of non-negotiables. What are people looking for there? How do I know if my blood sugars, if I'm not wearing, a CGM or something like
Right.
that these days?
Yeah. And I do like to loosen it up a little bit. So even with counting calories or carbs or fiber
Fiber
grams, I know,
grams, right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I know it can get
There are easier ways to go
very.
about that than logging them and counting them. Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just tuning in, like literally
Mhm.
just inviting people to say, like, wait, fiber, what is that? Am I getting enough? And with some people, increasing their fiber increases digestive distress or leads to constipation. So I just want to invite the playfulness there because I think that's a way that we're just living and not like living with restrictions that I know, at least for a lot of women, can be get them into a place of shoulds and stresses, which doesn't help the situation.
Right.
So, blood sugar balance. Blood sugar balance is where our blood sugars are swinging in relation to what we eat or our particular unique body's response to what we eat. So, what I would have people looking at is how they feel. One of the things I like to do for tracking is what I call a food, mood, poop journal. So, you're tracking what did I eat, not with calories, just what did I eat? How do I feel? So mood isn't just a mood sensation. I put that in air quotes. So what signs or symptoms come up? and when do I eliminate? And being able to step back, not analyze it while you're in it, helps us to see, oh, when I had that muffin for breakfast, I was really hungry by 9:30. Whereas if I ate those eggs and greens for breakfast, I actually was fine until 11 o'clock, at which point I decided to eat lunch. This just becomes an opportunity for experimentation before we're looking at our lab markers, potentially going to a continuous glucose monitor. There's lots of ways, but the first way I would say is, does your food consumption sustain you? And what can you learn from the signs and symptoms you experience, including fatigue, brain fog, energy dips, and where does that lead to experimentation in changing a factor? One common area I would see was that afternoon slump that a lot of people get into where they want to go for the cup of coffee or the cookie at 3 o'clock. And so if you notice every single day, I have these cravings at 3 o'clock, it's likely because you're tired. That could be related to your blood sugar and that dip after lunch. And we need to back that up. And maybe if that's happening every single day, we eat something small with fat, fiber, or protein at 2:30 so that we can see, does that help me through that 3 o'clock dip where I'm so down that I go reaching, which isn't just mental, it could be physiological need for homeostasis, for balance. And so that's a quick way we can just track and stay tuned. There's lots of ways, as you mentioned, that we could go deeper with blood sugar if we have suspicions around it. And blood sugar imbalances are one of the biggest inflammatory factors that people are exposed to. And we know inflammation is at the root of most chronic conditions. It's one of my three roots. And so it's a way we could just start paying attention to what we're consuming and what works for us. And I just want to say there's no rules around that. There's more and more research that shows that we have a personalized response to different foods. So your French fries may be my ice cream for my blood
Right.
sugar, but we may
Right.
actually be totally flipped with the opposite one. So you got to tune into you.
Yeah, 100% back to that self-experimentation, right?
Yes.
And I think some people may be surprised at what an effect what we eat has on things like mood, right?
Oh, yeah.
And just, yeah, I mean, it just impacts so many parts of our lives as we've been talking about here for the last 30, 40 minutes here. All right. So, Andrea, somebody's listening to all this and thinking, oh, okay, wow, I really hadn't thought about nutrition in these terms, but I tuned in because I just want to know what to eat. Do you have any s- I don't want to say simplified, but do you have any ground rules for any nutritional basics that you would pass on as far as these are my nutritional guidelines that are just, we've talked a lot about everybody's a bio individual, right? And what may be a increase, spike your blood sugar might in fact be fine for me. But in general, are there ways of eating that are healthier and help us be healthier humans than others? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I of course have, my own rules, and if somebody has a condition that I'm working with, I'm thinking particular to them. I can't give up on the bio individuality, so my principles that I'm going to share are going to honor that bio individuality, and I just am going to say I literally won't give certain rules like don't eat gluten or because in a situation like this, in a one-on-one, I would because I'd be able to support somebody with that change. But these directives that we're getting today are very triggering for people. They're either all or nothing. There's a lot out there about eating a ketogenic diet for all the wrong reasons without realizing that your body can't tolerate it. Intermittent fasting, if somebody has blood sugar issues, it is not the right thing to be doing. And so that drives me a little mad that that's how we're being exposed to nutrition. And then there's a counter to that right now, which is the whole anti-diet culture, body positivity. which I think is important, but we're in this polarized place of either all or nothing. And so my principles are going to be more in the middle of where we can be making incremental changes for ourselves. And I mentioned one of them, which was fat, fiber, protein. So every single meal, fat, fiber, protein. Of course, we could talk about which fats and what kind of fiber, what amount. I don't care. Fat, fiber, protein. Just start playing with that at every meal. Ask yourself the question, do I have fat, fiber, protein in what I'm eating for breakfast, for snack, for lunch, for dinner? Principle number one, fat, fiber, protein. Principle number two, eat the rainbow. And that means that we're getting more of our phytonutrients that come not just with fiber, but with lots of nutrition, with lots of the nutrients that our body needs to heal and repair. And it doesn't need to be 8 cups or this or that. If you ate like 3 blueberries, awesome. Did you get your blue and your purple? I don't know. Check them both. Have fun with it. Be playful. Just eat the rainbow. It's really kind of fun to look at what do I actually get in the day? Or when I go to the grocery store, what's a color I notice I don't get much of? Have a good time with your food. This is not about a diet. This is about life and living. And then my third principle is around those non-negotiables. So I call it a yes, no, maybe list. And if you aren't feeling okay and you don't know what works for you, write those down in those columns. I feel great when I eat this. I know I can eat. When I met my boyfriend, he couldn't eat a lot of foods. He's super fit, but he was restricting his diet because he couldn't tolerate fiber because he needed some gut healing. But for him, he could say to me in those early days, like, yeah, I can't eat onions or garlic or broccoli. And I was like, oh, interesting. He then
Mhm.
told me if I could fix him, I was the queen. So I get queen status now because he's fixed and can eat anything. But we have to know what are our yes, no, and maybe lists. People often know when I eat this, it doesn't work for me. Put that in a no column. And when you do seek help, if you need to seek help, that information is really helpful. I knew right away where we needed to go as an expert when he said that to me. So that gives me information. And the maybe list, if your maybe list is really, really long, that's also informative when you're seeking help. But for ourselves, again, fat, fiber, protein, eat the rainbow, know your yes, no maybes. I know it's not the sexy rules everybody wants that promises results, but it's the lifelong sustainable way of thinking about what we eat.
I love how you finished there. I love all of that, the lifelong sustainable way of thinking about what we eat. And that's where I figured you might go with some version of that. And I kind of expected you to say, well, we should eat mostly whole foods, right? That's kind of the way that's communicated. As I'm looking at your list, you would be hard pressed to have fat, fiber, and protein at every meal, to eat the rainbow, and and of course, then you have your non-negotiables. But if you just did those first two things, you're probably in that you're not making room for a whole lot of Doritos and Pop Tarts, are you?
Correct.
Soda probably doesn't fit in there either. So I think that in a way you're kind of saying the same thing there. And I love that you talk about how polarizing what we've eaten has become lately. It's rather strange. I mean, it's cultural, it's political, it's got
Totally.
all these overtones. If you eat this way, you're good. If you eat this way, you're bad.
Yep.
And then you have all the nonsense about, hey, there's a lot out
A
there and it's
lot.
overwhelming. And for people like us that are geeks, I'm a nutrition nerd. I love talking about nutrition. Bring it on. I'll debate it all day long. But for your average consumer, it's just overwhelming and very unhelpful that all of that is floating around there. And Andrea, I did want to ask you, just as you were kind of talking about building out this plan, what are your thoughts on supplements? You had mentioned eating the rainbow. And of course, we know that you had mentioned the soil that the roots are growing in. We know that most of even our, unfortunately, organic veggies in the supermarket are probably monocropped in Central California, and that's very mineral and nutrient depleted soil. What are your thoughts on getting nutrients through supplementation? Yay, nay?
Yeah.
How do you feel
So
there?
again, like I'm going to go back to my 3 tiers. So non-negotiables, deficiency to sufficiency, dismantling
Right.
dysfunction. So deficiency to
Yeah.
sufficiency. And the other side of that is toxicity. So there's a
Hmm.
continuum there. but we want to know where there's a deficiency. And again, I believe this should be in the hands of somebody who's supporting that, not made up because we saw that, I have this symptom and this says that that's going to fix that symptom. We have people in our clinic complete a supplement tracker because oftentimes people are taking things, they don't even know why they're taking them. They don't have any idea if it's worked or it hasn't worked. So I like to supplement, making sure that we're addressing a known deficiency or that we're working with something specific. I tend not to use these like multi nutrient supplements because there might be something in there that doesn't work for you. So I tend to work singularly and individually. And I just want to say, when I talk about deficiency to sufficiency, the deficiency might be in water. Yeah, it might be in vitamin D or hydrochloric acid where we need support supplementally, but it could be in joy. It could be in sleep. It could be in
Mm.
movement. So I like to think of these things more broadly. So we see, oh, what can I do that isn't just based on me seeing a provider? Because I can look at your vitamin D deficiency. I could look at your iron deficiency and talk to you about that as a nutritionist. But you know about your deficiency in joy or laughter. That's only something you know. So this goes back to the original premise of yes, I take supplements, I recommend supplements, but it's a very individual and it's based on what's going on for that person, not based on a fancy lab test that we're trying to move to. It's foundational, and it's foundational health that we're bypassing in favor of so many of these, I'm going to call them the sexy quick fixes.
Sure. No, I'm 100% with you. Yeah. So supplementing where you're deficient, that makes absolute sense. The reason I bring it up is there's a couple reasons. One is just, I mean, just like diet culture has just gone mad. So is the supplement industry. And here in the US, it's unregulated, which means
Yep.
that who knows what you're really taking and how. At any rate, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down. But it seems to me that certainly if you are deficient, to your point, not because you Googled a symptom, because you've done a test and you're working with a provider who's an expert in these things, certainly quality supplementation can help, but certainly that's not it seems that that's the quick, sexy place to go too, right?
Yes.
Oh, I'm deficient in vitamin D. Well, why are you deficient? You go all the way back to this. Hey, let's now go
Yes.
from that branch into the trunk of the tree. Now let's get down into the roots and hey, let's look at this whole ecosystem that this
Exactly.
tree is evolving in. So absolutely love all that. All right. Well, Andrea, let's see here. As we're wrapping up, what's next for you? What do you got on the horizon? You mentioned you're kind of
Yeah.
moving more
So
into the education space.
yeah, so it's been education for providers. So I've been
Mm-hmm.
educating and continue to educate through the Functional Nutrition Alliance, thousands of practitioners every year, which is a real joy for me. I mean, I just love being able to work with practitioners, whether they're health coaches or fitness professionals or a lot of nurses coming through, dietitians, to think more functionally. It's a big reframe, it's a big paradigm shift. So I love that work. And I'm working on a book. Like, I have a book deal, but it likely won't come out for several years. But a lot of that work and writing will be on my personal website. So, Functional Nutrition Alliance for Practitioners. Andrea Nakayama is where all the new work is going, where I'm speaking more and doing more education for the patient who is sick and not getting better. Like, my message isn't for the 20% who can make a little change and everything's good. It tends to be for the person who's seeking and seeking and seeking and just not finding their way to resolution or the resolution they had hoped for. And so that's the audience I really want to address and hold and support through a lot of the practices that I've gained from training practitioners and also as I move into other realms of tracking and what's called narrative medicine.
Narrative medicine, huh? Okay, that's a new one for me. Well, all right. And you mentioned your website there. And what are other, how can people connect with you? What are other ways for your, are you on the socials, all that fun stuff?
Yep, on social media, everything's Andrea Nakayama. If spelling's confusing, don't make too much of it. It's all a lot of A's. So Andrea Nakayama on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on all the places, all the socials, Andrea Nakayama for the website. So that makes it easy for everyone.
It does. And folks, I will put all of that information into the show notes. You guys can find that there. Andrea, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing all your wisdom and your knowledge and clearly your passion with us. And I just applaud the work you're doing and encourage you to keep up the great work. The world needs more of that.
Thank you. And thank you for the great questions. It was really fun.
Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I want to let you know that we have other great free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There you'll find our free guides with our top tips on nutrition, exercise, and healthy lifestyle to assist you in your weight loss and fitness journey. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you. I'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes, and you can find that over at silveredgefitness.com/183. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. One is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to consider giving this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.